Okay, we still have folks coming in, but I want to honor everyone's time. So, my name is Shawna McBride. I'm an education program manager with DCYF. I work at our statewide office, supporting the ed leads, and we have 6 regional ed leads, educational efforts in supporting social workers and our kids in foster care. I've been in my position for 8 years now, formerly many, many years ago as a social worker in the field. Took some time off to be a mom and have 3 kids, now young adults, who all have had education challenges, had special education plans, so have always been a big advocate for education access. With my social worker background, years ago, a friend saw a job post come across her desk, which was for an education advocate for kids in foster care with Treehouse, and thought that that would just really kind of mesh my already natural advocate, can't say that word, advocacy with my social work. And it turned out to be a great fit. So I worked with Treehouse for 6 years, ran their educational advocacy program, and then came over to the state at DCHS, and now DCYF. So I'm really glad to be here. I have a long history with working with CASAs and GALs. I really appreciate the work you do. I was just talking with Ryan and our before the session started, and CASAs are typically with the student the most throughout a case, as far as just long term. Social workers change, schools change, and I just really appreciate that commitment and the working with CASAs to really be there for an advocate for our students. So thank you for being here. I have a presentation today, obviously, but am fine to have questions kind of throughout. So Ryan is going to watch the chat. If you have a question, either feel free to, it looks like we actually have a pretty big crowd here today, so it's probably best to put if you have a question in the chat, and Ryan can kind of be watching that, and I'll answer questions as we go. Okay. So again, Shawna McBride, I use she, her pronouns, and I am living on and working from the traditional lands of the Soxquin. Boy, I am tongue-tied this afternoon, Squaxin people. And I honor the land itself and the Squaxin people, past, present, and future. For some reason this morning, I just noticed that I didn't have future on there. So this has been my tag for quite a while now, and I heard someone say future, and I'm like, of course, why is that not on there? So oops. Okay. So I'm going to give an overview today about the legislation, how DCYF and the school districts and OSPI work together, as well as places where you as advocates can really be stepping in and understand where you can help support, best support kind of the school process. So kind of just, this is just the legislative milestones for education stability. And we started out in 2008, Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act. And that was really about kind of what child welfare's piece of education stability was, that workers had to have an education plan for each student, that we needed to look at placement when we were considering a placement, make sure that we were considering school, and then also school of origin, that kids were staying in their same school whenever in their best interest. And then in 2013, Uninterrupted Scholars Act came along, and that was really helpful because as we're trying to collaborate with the school districts, we were having a really hard time sharing information on our students or in a larger way, systematically. And this really said it was okay for school districts and child welfare to be sharing information. So from that, we started Data shares, which I'll talk a little bit more about, information sharing became a little bit easier. We still have challenges, all really well-intentioned, because folks are really wanting to keep education and foster care information confidential and make sure that they're only sharing it when needed. So I really try and honor that and just work through, what the law says and how we're able to share. And then in December 2015, the Every Student Succeeds Act came along, and that replaced the No Child Left Behind. And what was really significant about the Every Student Succeeds Act was a couple things. Primarily, it meant fostering connections was that the child welfare needed to work with the school districts, but there was no kind of reciprocating laws that the school districts needed to be working and collaborating with child welfare. And it wasn't that they weren't, it just wasn't really laid out as to how that should look. So in the Every Student Succeeds Act, there was really a defined what that collaboration needed to look like on enrollment, on record exchange, on transportation, on data share. So that was a really helpful milestone. It also created foster care liaisons in the school district. So the law said if child welfare has appointed liaisons, which we had 6 regional education leads, then the school district needs to reciprocate and assign school district liaisons. And that has been so huge to be able to have folks in the districts that our social workers can go to and really kind of have that ally in the school. They're typically the McKinney-Vento person as well. One of the other things that Every Student Succeeds Act was prior to this, the only foster care provisions that schools needed to be paying attention to for kids in foster care was really underneath McKinney-Vento. We had like this tiny little sliver that said school of origin. When kids come into DCYF care, that they have the right to stay in their school of origin. That was really the only provision that we school districts were required to collaborate on with us. So it really expanded that relationship. So fostering connections went over this. Placement setting needed to be considered along with the education setting. Child welfare to coordinate with school districts. There's federal, we also have a lot of state laws. And so this is just kind of an example of the child placement, policy, education, continuity, best interest determination. We'll get into that a little bit more, that needs to occur before a student changes school placements. And then immediate enrollment. So Washington State actually had, before Every Student Succeeds Act, actually had quite a few education stability laws in place. But again, we just didn't have the reciprocating requirement for the school districts to help support us. Just seeing if I missed anything there. Immediate enrollment again. Let's see. Why does school matter? I mean, I think I'm kind of like preaching to the folks that know this, but really, there's studies that show 3 to 6 months of education loss can occur every time a student moves. Education is the great equalizer. It can really helps with long-term outcomes. I mean, you take your education and you move from there. So it's really important. It's also, a place, it's normalcy. I mean, kids go to school. Kids go to school and stay with the same group of friends. They have the same teachers who kind of get to know them. So moving school placements frequently can really disrupt some of that just kind of normal development and nurturing support. And I do have a video. Let's see, it looks like it's be covered up here. So I have a video I want to show, and this is just really students who are either in foster care or who have experienced foster care talking about what school meant to them and how the disruptions in the child welfare system really affected them.
I was younger, I wanted to be a nurse, a doctor, a lawyer, a singer. I wanted to be somebody successful. Then I entered the foster care system when I was 14 years old. A lot of what I wanted to be didn't matter anymore.
Unstable, changing, and alone.
Where I learned absolutely nothing.
I didn't have traditional schooling. A lot of people don't understand that foster kids travel from home to home and placement to placement, residential to residential, and unfortunately, even though school should be the #1 priority, it's not.
11 schools.
I attended 12 schools.
Moving from school to school really affected my grades as well. I went from a B average to a low C average.
I lived in 45 different placements, and I went to over 23 different schools.
So while I was in foster care, I went to about like 10 schools.
I've been in 3 different elementary schools, 4 different middle schools, and countless high schools in both Idaho and Washington.
Inadequate, unfinished.
And I say hard because I had to wear this mask and pretend that everything is okay. Like
Emotionally tasking and difficult to be able to juggle that at an age where I wasn't fully developed.
Hard, a struggle.
Eye-opening.
Self-motivated.
I got threatened with expulsion twice because I was missing so many excused days, but I couldn't miss my court hearings.
Misunderstood because foster youth tend to come with a negative label, and because of that, I don't think that teachers and guidance counselors took the time to truly get to know me.
I'm still trying to continue my education.
I went to like 3 schools in them years, like 3 schools. And each school couldn't pass off the paperwork.
So insane.
I did not have a high school diploma. I had a certificate of attendance.
I say unstable.
While I was in Rikers Island, I graduated, got my GED.
Really hard, and it's really unstable. You get to this line where it's either you have to say that you're a foster youth to avoid getting zeros and on your missed tests and missed homework assignments, or you try to keep whatever privacy you have left and just take the zeros.
I'd never graduated high school. I stopped going, to be honest. It's something that's going to affect me for the rest of my life.
The statistics are really stacked against us.
We have about a million foster care students in the United States. We have about 7,000 here in Washington. But every time a student moves, they're having to get used to a new curriculum, get used to a new classroom setting, new school norms and rules, new playground, where's the lunch system. This past legislative session, a new bill was passed so that school districts had to assign a point of contact person for each building. I'm really hoping that can help with some of the continuity, with settling students in, with facilitating best interest determination meetings. I know that through some of the training, working with OSPI and Peggy Carlson, who is going to be here to present to you, she's working on what that training for the point of contacts will look like. And one of the things she was recently showing us was a checklist for when a kid does have to move schools, what things need to happen so that student really is, that there's a very intentional transition. When watching this video, we actually have a case that we're working on right now with a youth who is in multiple placement disruptions and is trying to get her enrolled into school, having some difficulties with that. And she was starting to get she's starting to kind of get a negative rep because she was being so, she was advocating for herself, and folks were starting to kind of use words like, she's being too persistent or too, a brat. And it's like, no. We should be doing that piece of educate or of advocating and cheering the student on for doing that advocating. So we really have done some work kind of in that area around getting kids enrolled in school and listening to and involving youth voice. Sorry, this has a lot of words on it, but basically this is that we have a data share with OSPI to really continue to share information that's going to be helpful for the student. So we have information sharing that's to help do our data, which is, I have some slides next, data slides, but also to identify students in school districts. So foster care liaisons know who their students are, and so that they can be connecting with the social worker, they can be connecting with the caregiver and the youth and helping with any kind of provisions that they may need, or just helping them settle in or be connected, helping with fines and fees. That data share also has the social worker information and contact on it, so that if a foster care liaison doesn't know right off the bat who the social worker for that student is, they now have that information so they can do a quick outreach. The data share also puts school individual child school information and history in our database. So a social worker can look at their family, which is our caseworker database, and see the whole education and history of a student in foster care. So they can see if they were involved in special education, because sometimes our kids come into care and they were in special education at one time, but it got dropped. And so they can kind of meet with the school and find out, is that still a needed service? It has attendance history, discipline history, again, to kind of get ahead of and be aware, and then enrollment history, and academic. So I know in the video it said kids in foster care nationally graduate at about 60%. In Washington for 2019, it was 46%. It does go up in a 5-year graduation rate, and I don't have that slide here. Last year, despite the pandemic, and maybe because of it, because we are looking at different ways to educate and reach out to our kids, the graduation rate was 51%. So it'll be really interesting to see what it is this upcoming year and kind of how we fare with the pandemic. This is still dismal. This is not an okay statistic. Since every Student Succeeds Act has come into place, which was 2015, we're at 37%. So we have we've risen from 37 to 50. So we're on an upward, but it's still, we need to be doing better and advocating wherever we can. The educational outcomes, this is a 4-year cohort. So it's any student who is in foster care for 1 day or more is while they're in high school is included in this. We are working with OSPI and our DCYF data reporting folks to get a year by year for the students that are currently in care. So we're kind of constantly looking at our data and how we can be looking at it better. Again, we're really trying to look at our data and trying to break it out, race, gender, ethnicity, so that we can do some more targeted outreach and supports. This is percentage of kids who met English language and arts assessments. Our kids in foster care are the purple, very low. They perform much less than, at a much lower rate than our kids who are not in foster care. And I think a lot of this also has to do with, trauma and trauma-informed care in the schools and in child welfare can support some of this.
Hey, Shawna.
Yeah.
Question in the chat. Why does a foster child placement moved with school moved included have to again reinitiate treehouse advocacy each time and often land once again on the waiting list for treehouse services?
So that's a good question. It probably depends on which service they're involved in. If they're involved in education advocacy, which is that's a short-term kind of barrier removal. So they may enter, have a triage referral, have services, and then whatever that that identified issue, when that's resolved, then the case is closed. So they're typically open for just a couple of months, which would mean that if the student moved after that, they would have to do another referral. Wait list. We've had a shortage of ed advocates being able to, in hiring, especially in, I think, King County. But if you do at the time of referral, if you let them know that it's enrollment, it's discipline, that immediate support is needed, then they will try and get someone at least to do a informational and get things started enrolling while on the wait list. So again, our enrollment by special education and foster care status is almost twice as their non-foster care peers. So the more folks that are in support of kids in foster care that are aware of special education law, of the process, and this is something where as a CASA, you can be helpful in knowing the education kind of process. You can reach out to a regional education lead, a foster care liaison, the OSPI ombudsman, special education ombudsman. They can help with process as well to kind of understand. And then also really, being a voice at that table for a special education meeting and questioning, what is the assessment? What are the goals? Are the goals the right goals for, whatever is going on? And sometimes it's all academic, but a lot of behavioral and trauma support also needs to be included in there. So the best interest determination. So we have state and federal law and DCYF education policy that says students can remain in their same school unless it's in their best interest to attend elsewhere. This should occur before a student moves school and at the first kind of hint that there is going to be a school move, and the student should stay at their school of origin until the decision and determination has been made. Should be child-centered. I know in Region 6 and a couple other regions, we're really working to figure out how to strengthen the process to get best interest determinations done, get the right folks at the table, and have it be as close to, sometimes we don't know that there's going to be a move until the day it occurs, or, it's a really close timeline. But getting this best interest determination done as close to that and keeping the student in their school is what we're striving for. The folks that really should be involved and invited for their input is the CASAs, the caseworker, the school, caregiver, parents. Natural parents have the right, they retain education rights unless the court appoints an education liaison because that parent is not available, or their rights have been terminated. But there's really very few circumstances where, unless it's a safety issue, that a parent cannot or should not be that education liaison. They should be the first in line for that designation. It's really, really beneficial to keep them involved, especially if permanency is returned home. It allows them to be a parent in the case and with their children. It allows them to be on board with decisions that are being made that they will have to kind of facilitate and hold on to once a child is returned home. And then the student knows what works for them, what their connections are at the school, who their friends are. The best interest determination does not have to be a sit down or Zoom meeting. It can be a gathering of information, especially if we're trying to do a quick turnaround. So the social worker may reach out and ask for input through a call, through an email. I think it's awesome and probably works best when the group can be pulled together and hear each other's opinions and kind of be each other's sounding boards. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a meeting. It just needs to be all these input from all these folks taken into consideration. So again, one way that DCYF is really trying to strengthen the process and get the school folks to know if this has occurred, if it's not occurred, is we have a school notification form. Anytime a student, and I'm sorry, the print is small in here. I was trying to get as much information on there, but anytime a student comes into care, changes home placements or returns home, a social worker needs to let the school know that, the school district. That way they have, change of caregivers, change of social workers, if there's any safety concerns. And so on the back of this, we put the school selection, kind of the best interest determination checklist to really pair these. So student moves, the best interest determination should occur. And sometimes it happens at the local level. So the foster care liaison at the district may not be aware that it's occurred. And this just gives them some information. And again, it should be student-centered. Do they have friends? How are they doing academically? What's the age of the student? Are they acquiring credits if they move to another school? Is that going to upset their graduation date, the credits that they're acquiring? It's really, we ask social workers to involve the school where the student is attending and the neighborhood school of where the student could be attending or is now living. Because different schools have different supports and services, and a student may say, I'm really interested in this, and the current school doesn't have that, but the new school does, and that might be really appealing. That might be a community art or drama or a sports club that the student may really be able to connect with. So is there special education needs? Someone from special education should be considered in gathering of information. Again, because one school may have services that better meet a student's needs. I have a little bus there on the side because transportation, as a reminder, transportation really is not supposed to be part of this conversation. It's not about, will it work for the adults? What does it look like logistically? It's really about, is a student involved in this school? What will a disruption do to their school continuity, to their well-being? How will that affect them? However, we do know that getting a kid to school is really important. So at the bottom of this form, and I believe it's here, oh, you can't see, there is a question about, is transportation needed? So this also is kind of like the ticket to the school to start that coordination for shared transportation as well.
Shawna, a couple questions about the form.
Yeah.
That came through. One of our advocates noticed that on the other side of the form, that the child advocate or guardian ad litem is not included as part of the people who could make best interest determinations.
You're right. Well, I am actually just about to make another update to the other side, and that is definitely something I can add on there. You're absolutely right. Yep. Thank you.
Probably throw their, don't tell the attorneys I said this, but I'd throw attorney in that category as well.
Okay. I'm writing myself a little note here.
And then this form's available on the DCYF website. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yes. Yes. And it's titled School Notification Form.
Got it.
So I don't have the number right offhand, but there is a tab to put the title of the form and its school notification.
A couple of other questions, if you don't mind.
No, not at all.
Okay, I think these are pretty easy. Let's start with this one. Is the special education ombudsman based at OSPI or in school districts?
Based at OSPI.
Okay.
Yes,
And
so there's
then-
there is a special education, actually parent liaison at OSPI, and there's a Washington State special education ombudsman that is a governor's office.
And then this is another one, a little off subject, but who becomes the educational advocate after parental rights have been terminated?
So it would be the education, an education liaison would be appointed. So every time there's a court hearing, so every 6 months, that is something that should be looked at by the court. When a student parental rights are terminated, it's the social worker to identify possible persons who could fill that role and make that recommendation to the court, and then the court will appoint. It really should be someone who is a natural support to that student. It can be a caregiver, it can be a coach, an aunt, someone who hopefully can commit to being in that student's life, being invested, coming to meetings, and really being that advocate, of course. So it's the education liaison. In some rare cases, we have had CASAs be appointed to that role, but again, it's really meant to be kind of a natural support role. It cannot be the caseworker, it cannot be Treehouse or anyone whom we have a service contract with.
That's it. Thanks.
So with the pandemic, it's been, to say the very least, education's been a little wonky the last couple of years. Students have had delayed special education services. Students were unable to access a full year of school due to not having internet access. I do think the school districts, DCYF, OSPI, did a really pretty thorough job of making sure that folks had the technology they needed, but not everyone in our state has reliable access to internet. So there were gaps, a lot of gaps in student learning last year. So the Congress and state legislators came together and said, okay, we need to put forth funding for district recovery plans. And each district can get that funding this school year. They had to put in a plan last year. And that was really like, how are they going to do assessments? What assessments are they going to use? How are they going to make sure that they are equitable? And if they needed help, OSPI helped them with what tools they needed. But really it was about how are they going to do, not like, oh, we're going to assess over the next year and figure out, but like, how are we going to assess as soon as we get our students back in the classroom, how we are going to do some quick remediation work and help really keep our students moving forward. So school districts had to put these plans in place. They will have their recovery service plans listed on their school district site. So each school district has to have one, and it's on their school district site, outlined what their goals were. And then they're receiving grants to help support that. I was just in a meeting with OSPI, and because we're still smack in the middle of a pandemic, we will be, the recovery plan will probably go through school year 22-23. So really when schools were submitting their plans last spring, we kind of were hoping that we were seeing the end of the pandemic, but we're still kind of there. So the services will be extended, funding will be extended. I Yeah, this was so really looking at each student's mastery of critical skills and concepts. What will the interventions be in place? And it was about accelerated learning, not just about like catching up, but what are they doing to really help students keep moving and addressing those gaps. Ways that CASAs can get to know their school district liaisons, their DCYF folks regionally, are reaching out to, and I don't know if I have this link in there, but if you go to the DCYF website, we have our education leads listed under adolescent programs. So in the restructure, education sits under adolescent programs in DCYF. And they have monthly staffings in the coffee time in some of the areas. They do Zoom meetings. Region 6 has a distribution list and has many local CASAs on that for when there's like a kind of an immediate like, wow, we have a caregiver or a CASA who wants to staff an education case that's going out now. And they'll send out to this Region 6 kind of small distribution list and say, anyone available at 3 o'clock today, we're going to staff this case. So, and that's been really successful. So reaching out to your regional education lead or emailing me, and I can help make that connection, can help you just kind of to get to know the faces of folks that are also supporting our kids. Education supports and resources. We talked about at Advocacy. It's really a short-term barrier removal. They kind of come in, assess the situation, and help. I always say kind of work themselves out of a job. They help give resources and supports to the caregiver and the social worker to know kind of those next steps to be able to do the advocacy for the student, and then they move back. And it's kind of how they're able to keep their volume of serving kids up. And then we have graduation success, which is for our high schoolers. And that's really more of a long term. Once a student is referred to graduation success, they stay with graduation success pretty much through graduation. Even if they leave care, they have the option to continue working with the graduation success support. Graduation success, kids who are involved in their program are graduating at more of an 80%. So having that person, that advocate, someone there that's planning goals with you is so important. Graduation success is in about 2/3 of our high schools and districts across the state. Last year in legislation, they were given full funding to expand statewide over the next 2 years. So they have about 100 more school districts that they're working to get into. I think they're working in about another 50 this year, and then next year another 50, because just scaling that large over a short time is pretty amazing, but a lot of work too. So really excited that graduation success will be available to all of our high school students. At Advocacy, hopefully it will provide a little more capacity in that program, because they will primarily be kindergarten through 8th grade then, once it's full statewide. So Treehouse, because they work with a pretty high population of our kids, last year they were able to kind of do a survey of caregivers, social workers, and youth to kind of find out where what impact COVID had on our students. There was disengagement in school and need of support. That was the number one. Kids were disengaged. Kids were not getting the special education services they needed. They weren't getting kind of the one-on-one, so they need academic remediation and tutoring. And we asked Treehouse to do this primarily because we wanted to know what services we should be asking the legislators for, what supports we can put in place to help support our kids. Like I said, technology, which I believe is on here, Most of our kids did have access to technology. That was kind of like the first thing. The schools, DCYF, we all were like, do our kids have the computers, the tablets they need? And then it's those other well-being pieces, mental health, just basic needs, food assistance. This was just a really helpful, we got this last November. So pretty early on, and we're able to just really work kind of together to try and backfill those other supports. One of the things that came out of it was DCYF received some money from the CARES Act. And because school engagement was down, because materials and resources are needed, we gave a contract to Treehouse to be able to work directly with caregivers and extended foster care youth to provide money and resources for tutoring. It's beyond tutoring though. It's also for anything that's going to help encourage engagement in school. So school supplies, desks, extracurricular activities that kind of help with that community and school engagement with their peers, summer schools and summer camps throughout last summer. This funding runs out in December. We want to make sure we spend it all down. So if you are working with youth that could use tutoring, that could use a spring camp, because we can prepay for a spot in a spring camp, even though the funding ends in December, we can do some prepayment of some services. We can also, if there's a tutor that they need for the full year, they can prepay and get that set up. It can be a private tutor, like a college student, a retired teacher. It could be a Sylvan. So it's really fairly flexible. Treehouse will do background checks and can pay out to the caregiver of the youth directly, so that they're not waiting on reimbursement or vendor stuff to get set up. So this has been really helpful. We've had a large number of kids access this fund. So if you know of anyone, it's going to the Treehouse website, and under programs and services, you can click on the CARES Act and it'll show you how to do a referral. You could do a referral. You could also work with caregivers that you may be working with and point them to the website, and they can make that referral as well. Other resources, OSPI's website is wonderful. All the laws I was talking about, a lot of the resources are there, and their FAQs. There is a dispute process. That was something that also came out of Every Student Succeeds Act, was that we were mandated to work with OSPI to come up with a process for if our caregivers in the school or a social worker in the school do not agree on best interest determination, school enrollment, for a process to be able to help resolve that. And I will say that, gosh, probably in the 5 years that we've had this process set up, maybe once has a case actually got to this process. It's kind of a 3-step process. It's going to your local folks involving the foster care liaison, the regional DCYF ed lead, and then myself kind of in another tier. And we've been able to, just through kind of mediation and meetings, really work through those disagreements. Really, again, just bringing the child back to the center of all the conversations. So. Other resources are the Treehouse programs, our regional education leads, and the foster care liaisons, and the point of contacts. They will not be listed on the, this is on the OSPI website as well, under foster care. The points of contacts will not be listed yet, but if we reach out to the district foster care liaisons, they can connect to the point of contacts. That is what I have today. And I'm not sure if I'm still sharing. Stop share. Okay. Were there any other questions or things that maybe I didn't cover?
That's it from the chat. Do you just want to open it up for general questions and just have people
Yeah.
unmute themselves? Sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead and just unmute yourself and
Can you explain the relationship between Treehouse and the state?
yeah, absolutely. So Treehouse is a nonprofit that has education contracts, service contracts with DCYF and OSPI. And we have data share, and OSPI, I saw someone ask what that was. I apologize. Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. So they're kind of the guidance and governing agency of all the school districts. I say re-emphasize guidance because our schools have our school districts have local control, but they are able to make sure that the school districts are meeting federal and state regulations. But again, Treehouse, we have a contract with them, and their grad success is a OSPI contract, so contracted services.
Speaking of Treehouse, there's a question in chat. Is the CARES Act money only accessible through Treehouse?
So for the tutoring, it is only available through Treehouse. For the supports that I was mentioning in my PowerPoint, CARES Act money is being distributed in a lot of different ways. Some of it was distributed to our kids in extended foster care with additional payments. Some was distributed to our kids who are accessing our education training voucher scholarship that's administered through DCYF to help support additional school funds that they may have that were not covered by financial aid. It was used for childcare subsidies, so it's been used in a lot of different ways. But again, kind of our agency looked at the overall needs and saw that education was a really important thing for our kids during the pandemic, and there was a lot of gaps. So we were able to grant, it was $2.3 million in service dollars to Treehouse for a one-year contract.
And then just to,
sorry. I'm Rajan Amins from Jefferson County. Is there any, I know that they talked a lot for Treehouse about teenagers, but is there an age that kids can be available, not available, but for any of them will need to be available? Is there for tutoring, even if it is in elementary school, can we connect with Treehouse?
Yes, absolutely. Treehouse services are kindergarten through extended foster care. So if you have a kindergarten, a first grade or second grader that needs support with tutoring, Treehouse CARES Act can help as well.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then my next question might be for Ryan Moore. I'm seeing websites and other things, Ryan, in the chats. When you get when the tape is being done, will the chat be on that too? Sometimes I'm not fast enough to write everything.
I knew you were gonna, so I'll see what I can do, Rajan.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I know you will.
Damn it, yes, you do.
There is a question in the chat about, are all foster kids assessed by Treehouse or schools for special education services? And Treehouse does not do special education assessments. They may work with a youth and say, wow, it looks like there's a suspected disability here. And then they would work with the caregiver and the social worker to make a referral to the school district. The school district does assessments for special education when requested, or when requested because there's a suspected disability, but it's not an automatic for all of our kids in out-of-home care. There's also a question, did you say that each individual school has a designated foster care liaison? So each district has a foster care liaison, and per last year's legislation, each school building is required to appoint a point of contact, which just means someone who hopefully knows the supports and the services and can make that direct contact to building services to that student and family. Support for extracurricular activities. Perhaps not central, this is the question, perhaps not central in a strictly educational sense, but so important for building community and creating social connections. Absolutely, Nancy. I have been telling folks to really access that Treehouse CARES Act for extracurricular activities. Right, and this sounds a little counterintuitive. It sounds like you get it, but right now there's a lot of anxiety. Our kids have not been in school. They haven't been allowed to be around their peers as they typically have been in past years. And so having something, an extracurricular activity where there isn't the pressure of the school, but they are getting some connection and some socialization supports, I think is really valuable. And I think that is supportive to education engagement. So does Treehouse, and so does our contract. So it does support extracurricular activities, regardless of them being directly connected to the school or not.
But what will happen when the CARES Act funding dries up?
When the CARES Act funding dries up, that's, we don't have ongoing funds for that. We can work with caregivers to find scholarships, like at the YMCA, scholarships in their local boys and girls clubs. So we can work with them there, but there isn't going to be a set fund. Kids who are in King County Treehouse Services do support extracurricular, and Little Wishes is the name of that program, but it's not a statewide. So it just means a little more creativity, unfortunately. Would kids with language challenges be eligible for a 504 plan? I think that there could be an argument for that. I mean, if they need something to access the general education classroom, if they need a tutor, or not a tutor, if they need an interpreter, if they need support with early or learning the English language, I think that that's a discussion to absolutely have with your school special education services department. Looking to see if I missed any questions. And again, please feel free to take yourself off mute if you have questions as well. I think it's so again, I just want to thank you all for the work that you do for our children, and again, that again, a lot of kids change foster care, caregiver, or like social workers, and foster care placements, and to have someone that knows them, that knows their history, that can say, hey, I've been with a student for 2 years now, and last year they weren't having these challenges, and maybe bring in, start that conversation, like, what was working for you last year? What was the change? Those conversations can be really valuable. We don't all mesh, and so it could be that there's a teacher that just hasn't quite connected with the student. It could be the students and the friendships in classrooms, especially if they're like moving from a elementary to middle school to high school. Not all the same friendships groups follow. So really kind of going, wow, I remember you were having this challenge before and it helped when you did this. Is there that opportunity here? Those voices are really important, which is also why it's really important to keep the parent engaged, is because they have that information as well. And regardless of the deficits that brought their kids into care, they are still their parents, and have that right to be involved, to share the knowledge that they have. It's just really, really important, and I appreciate you all being here today.
Well, thank you, Shawna. Would you mind, I can't remember if did you send me a copy of your PowerPoint?
I can, and I will try and I will do a little tweaking with it this afternoon and try and get all the links for the DCYF foster care, just all the information I had there. I'll try and make sure that there's links to Treehouse and to our ed leads. And
yeah, no problem. Thank you so much. And I think since nobody else has any other questions, we'll put a pin in this one.
All right. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shawna.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.